So we'll see. This is one of the things I'm sure Penny's lawyers are working on right now. They're asking him, "Hey, did you know how dangerous the subway is, and can you prove it? Can you prove that you knew?" The only other argument the defense could really make to the judge will be, "Well, everybody knows. It's literally common knowledge. It's not specialized knowledge. It's common knowledge that the subways are violent, and therefore it should be simply presumed that Penny, as a routine passenger on the subway cars, would know this." And maybe that'll work. It didn't work for Theodore Wafer. Let's see if I have anything else to address. I wanted to come back to the legal costs. I got sidetracked there for some reason. So I had mentioned that they've raised now. In fact, I'll update it again. Now it's $2,054,000. Minutes ago we looked; it was $2,033,000. So the amount keeps going up. How can you spend all this money on a legal defense? It's not just or even much of the lead attorney's billable. First of all, you don't just have a lead attorney. He'll have a team of attorneys, which is very helpful because different attorneys have different strengths and weaknesses. And if you have a team, you can make the whole much more effective than the individual parts. At the very least, you need a lead and a second chair so that while the lead, whoever's in the lead at the moment, on cross-examination, 1,000 things are going through their mind while they're the active participant in the defense. And it's easy to miss things or forget things or have a bullet point list of things you want to talk about and neglect to touch upon one of them. Because like I just got sidetracked off this issue. How can it cost so much money for a legal defense? It's not hard for an overwhelmed attorney to be in that position in a courtroom, especially if this ends up like a Derek Chauvin trial where the prosecution brings 15 prosecutors into the trial and there's one defense lawyer. So I'm sure they're not going to allow that to happen in Daniel Penny's case. I'm sure they'll have a team of defense lawyers, but you need more than that. So, for example, we're going to have a jury pool and we're going to have jury selection, which is a misnomer. Defense lawyers don't get to select juries. We have a modest ability to deselect individual jurors. But that jury pool is going to be subject to what, 6 months, a year and a half of propaganda. The jury pool is going to be poisoned. Worse, a lot of members of the jury pool are going to be politically motivated to get on the jury, specifically to seek justice in the preformed belief that Daniel Penny is guilty and only a guilty verdict can achieve justice in this case. That's not a fair, impartial, unbiased juror. And they'll be subject to voir dire. And what do you think a politically motivated juror like that is going to say on voir dire? They're not going to say, "Oh yeah, I already think he's guilty. Let's just go through the process and get this over with." No, they're going to lie. They're going to say, "No, I'm fair. I'm impartial. I'm unbiased." They're going to lie to get themselves onto the jury. And if a person like that is on the jury, you can't get an acquittal. It's impossible. At best, you'll get a hung jury, and they'll just try Daniel Penny again. Is he supposed to raise $2 million again for a second trial? Or will the public be exhausted by that point? And of course, you'll have these liars. We had this during the Zimmerman trial as far back as 10 years ago, and it happens in every high-profile trial since. Someone is being questioned on voir dire, telling the defense they'll be fair, they'll be impartial, they have no preformed opinions, and then you investigate that person's social media and you find out they are hardcore advocates for conviction. They're lying to you. And by the way, when they do this, they're never held accountable. Never held accountable. If you're lucky, you find out they're lying, you expose their lying, and you can get them removed as a prospective juror without having to use one of your limited strikes. You can have them removed for cause. But do you think it might, if you end up with a jury pool of several hundred people, which is not unusual in these high-profile cases, you think it might take a lot of effort to research the social media of several hundred people, especially if you don't really get their names until late in the process? And think about the social media you need to review. It's not just Twitter, it's Instagram, it's TikTok, it's Facebook, right? It's any social media platform. And so it's let's pretend it's 5 social media platforms. For every juror, there's 400 jurors. That's 2,000 social media records you need to check. And of course, the social media accounts are probably not under their real names. So you have to figure that out first. How many staff you think it's going to take to weed through 2,000 social media accounts to look for bias and partiality? And you can't just use dummies for that. You have to use people who know what they're looking for. That gets expensive. Expert witnesses will be extremely expensive. Both use of force expert witnesses, probably a BJJ expert witness, a medical examiner expert witness. All these people are expensive. To the extent New York State allows depositions of witnesses before trial, that varies a lot from state to state. In the Zimmerman trial, for example, Florida generously allows for depositions to be taken of witnesses before trial. Not every state allows for that in criminal cases. And the Zimmerman defense put all the state's witnesses through depositions. And thank God they did, because a lot of those people gave lengthy depositions where they gave one answer, not very helpful to the state. And then by the time they took the witness stand a year later, they gave after a year of being propagandized, after a year of seeing what the dominant narrative was, which was falsely that George Zimmerman was a racist murderer of a 12-year-old for the black boy for the crime of having Skittles and iced tea. After a year of that kind of propaganda, when they got on the witness stand, they told a different story that was very damaging to the defense. But because they had been deposed months prior at length by the defense was able to easily impeach their testimony on trial. That would not have been possible without those depositions. And depositions are expensive. They're very expensive. They're thousands of dollars each. So how many of those will need to be done here? How do you find out who was on the subway car? Have all those people come forward? Did the NYPD identify them? Can they all be found by the defense? All that takes investigators. All that takes a lot of time and effort. So how can these cases get that expensive? This is how they can get that expensive. Hiring a jury selection consultant for jury selection can easily be $100,000 all by itself. Easily. Now, maybe you don't just want to hire that expert for jury selection. Maybe you want them in the courtroom for the entirety of the trial. So they're observing the jury for micro expressions or whatever magic these people use. How expensive do you think that might get? Not just, hey, we need you for 3 days of jury selection. We want you to stay for a 4-week trial. So the money is going to be necessary. By the way, a clever thing the defense announced, they said, hey, because people begin wondering, well, what happens if you don't spend all this money on the legal defense? What happens if the charges get dismissed tomorrow and you don't have to go to trial? Of course, that's not going to happen. But if that were to happen, in theory, there'd be over $2 million here in legal funds. What's going to happen to that money? Is Daniel Penny just a millionaire all of a sudden? Did he profit off of this? Which I wouldn't have a problem with, by the way, personally. I'd be fine with that. I mean, look at the people who profit all these things. Often it's the family of the victim, right? The victim who was the unlawful aggressor in the fight. The family of the Trayvon Martin, the family of the George Floyd, the family of the Ahmaud Arbery. And listen, I'm completely sympathetic to any family who loses a loved one. It's a terrible thing to have happen. But you can't deny that lots of money came their way. So I have no trouble if Daniel Penny put in this position, charges are dropped. If that happened, presumably it would be because they had no merit, no legal merit. If Alvin Bragg were to decide to drop the charges, it's not because he suddenly became a MAGA conservative, a law enforcer on the New York City subways. I'd have no trouble with Daniel Penny walking away with $2 million. By the way, that's largely what happened in the Michael Brown case. The officer who shot and killed Michael Brown, who was subject to the same kind of propaganda we see here, right? Hands up, don't shoot. As if Michael Brown was surrendering when he was shot, as if he hadn't already fought that cop for his pistol, got shot in the process of doing that. Michael Brown's DNA was inside the cop's patrol vehicle. And as if Michael Brown was not charging that officer when that officer fired the fatal shots. Hands up, not in surrender, but hands up in attack. A lot of money was raised for that officer, rightly so. And then the matter went to a grand jury, and the grand jury refused to indict. And my understanding is that officer got to walk away with that money, which is why you've never heard of him again, because he had to leave his career as a police officer and effectively go into lifelong hiding, much as George Zimmerman has had to do now. So I would have no trouble with that. But the legal defense team has announced that, hey, if there's any money left over, we're going to contribute it to mental health in New York City, which I think is, as a practical matter, is probably a poor idea. I mean, you give money to a bureaucracy and maybe pennies on the dollar go to the purported purpose of the bureaucracy. Look at all the money that's given to the New York City public schools and what a great job they do educating their students. So I'm not sure giving money to mental health in New York is going to result in any meaningful change in mental health in New York. But politically, it's extremely savvy because, of course, a large part of the defense is, hey, here the problem here is not our client's use of force. The problem is the mental health issues of deranged people on the subways and the city's failure to adequately care for those people. Look, we're willing to care for those people. Here's $2 million. Everything we raised that we didn't have to expend up to this point, we're giving to mental health. We care about these mentally deranged people. My client cared about Jordan Neely. That's why he wasn't choking him. That's why he was merely restraining him. And no one is less happier than my client that Jordan Neely's physiology killed him. So a smart